The carrot and the stick. As the U.S. tries to coax Iran into a nuclear weapons deal, American warships shadow Iranian vessels suspected of carrying weapons to rebels in Yemen. But what are those U.S. warships authorized to do? This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. American diplomats in Vienna tonight are preparing to resume work on a nuclear deal with Iran to try to delay the Islamic Republic's ability to build a nuclear weapon. This, as American naval vessels are keeping a close eye on Iranian ships, which may be trying to add more weapons to the mix in the chaotic Houthi rebellion in Yemen. Those American sailors, however, are under strict orders about what they can't do. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Kevin Cork's at the White House with an eye-opening look at Iran's nuclear timeline and how the Obama administration has adjusted its public assessment of how long it would take Iran to get a bomb. But we begin with national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon with new naval moves tonight. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. Fox News has learned from a senior U.S. defense official that the White House is, quote, not even close to making a decision about boarding and conducting a search of the Iranian vessels carrying arms to the Houthis.
The atmosphere at sea remains tense off the coast of Yemen in this high-stakes game of brinkmanship. Nuclear negotiations resume in Geneva today as this military standoff between U.S. and Iranian warships in the waters off Yemen serves as a backdrop. Meanwhile, late today, the Saudis announced that they are ending their airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen for now, perhaps a response to Iranian President Hassan Rouhani's call for a ceasefire as this proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Yemen continues unabated.
We hope that everybody comes to their senses, and we hope that Iran's proposal is realized. It is for an immediate ceasefire. We believe that this is a solution that can resolve Yemen's predicament.
There is an opportunity for us to try to affect a legitimate political transition in Yemen.
Meanwhile, the USS Theodore Roosevelt has entered the Gulf of Aden, and Pentagon officials confirm it is now shadowing the 9 ships in the Iranian convoy and launching aircraft, including F-18 Hornets, to fly manned reconnaissance near the Iranian ships.
What we just did was, essentially, we pushed all the chips into the center of the table. Now, if the Iranians are dumb enough to call that, then we have to act on the hand, because we have the winning hand.
The State Department tried to downplay U.S. intentions.
I think there was a lot of misreporting. I saw a lot of cable tickers today, ships going there to intercept Iranian ships. That is blatantly untrue. So this discrete movement of U.S. assets is for a discrete purpose.
9 U.S. Navy warships and 3 support ships are now operating in the area stretching from the southern Red Sea to the Arabian Sea. The U.S. warships are enforcing a UN arms embargo against Yemen passed last week. The Iranians deny that their convoy contains weapons.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia announced, quote, the military objectives of Operation Decisive Storm have been achieved in Yemen. Senior Houthi leaders say a political deal has almost been reached, but the Iranian convoy is still steaming towards Yemen, trailed by U.S. warships. Brett.
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon tonight. Jennifer, thank you. President Obama's public position for much of his administration that Iran was a year away from having the ability to build a nuclear bomb is being called into question tonight. Correspondent Kevin Cork looks at new information about what the president apparently knew all along.
The gulf between what the White House now says about Iran's nuclear capability and what it has said previously is undoubtedly significant. And there are new questions about why the administration's public tone about Tehran's program became more urgent leading up to the P5+1 negotiation deadline, despite what intelligence officials had been telling the White House for years. Bloomberg reported this week that Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz said the U.S. had believed for, quote, quite some time that Iran was 2 to 3 months away from having the materials to create a nuclear weapon, a position stated by the president himself on April 2nd, the day the nuclear framework was announced.
Today, estimates indicate that Iran is only 2 or 3 months away from potentially acquiring the raw materials that could be used for a single nuclear bomb.
But that didn't seem to square with what the administration had been saying about Iran's nuclear capability as far back as 2010. That year, the president's top nuclear advisor was quoted in the New York Times saying, quote, "We think that they have roughly a year dash time to develop a nuclear weapon," an idea repeatedly challenged by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who in 2012 suggested the regime was much closer than that to a nuclear threshold.
It's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb.
But in late 2013, the president insisted Iran was still a long way off.
Our assessment continues to be a year or more away, and in fact, actually, our estimate is probably more conservative than the estimates of Israeli intelligence services.
Then, in 2014, a major shift in language and emphasis. Gone were expressions like a year or more away. Instead, administration officials began using words like months away. The difference? Emphasis on the amount of time it would take to acquire materials for a nuclear weapon instead of how long it might take to actually create one. Listen to Secretary of State John Kerry in April 2014, nearly a year before the framework was announced.
I think it's fair to say that I think it's public knowledge today that we're operating with a time period for a so-called breakout of about 2 months.
A theme carried forward into this year by the president.
So currently, the breakout times are only about 2 to 3 months by our intelligence estimates.
Critics say the administration made a political calculation and changed the way it framed the Iran nuclear timeline in order to make the case for its Iran deal to Congress and the public.
Once the negotiations with Iran started and a nuclear deal started to emerge, I think it had an interest in reducing that time frame to suggest that the nuclear deal was a good deal and that would help it sell the deal. And I think in that respect it's similar to a used car salesman turning back an odometer on a car.
Asked about the discrepancy between the president's descriptions in 2013 and 2015, White House Deputy Press Secretary Eric Schultz said, quote, "There are separate assessments for the amount of time it would take Iran to acquire enough fissile material versus how long it would take to weaponize." He's clearly talking about the time to develop a weapon and not acquire the material for one. And yet tonight there is still significant daylight between the White House's position and that of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Iran's nuclear capability. Both do agree, Brett, that it could only be a couple of months before Iran could have the materials to create a bomb, but it's the Prime Minister who continues to make the argument that they could go all the way to weaponizing a bomb in less than a year, and that's one of the many reasons he continues to be very forceful in his opposition to the P5+1 talks.
Kevin Cork live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. Ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi has been sentenced to 20 years in prison. The country's first freely elected leader was overthrown by the military there almost 2 years ago. He was convicted on charges linked to the killing of protesters in 2012. Morsi and his Muslim Brotherhood group have been the targets of legal action since they were thrown out of office after millions protested their abuse of power. The U.S. will give Ukraine $18 million in non-lethal aid as it fights Russian-backed separatists. Vice President Biden informed Ukraine's president yesterday about the money for shelter, food vouchers, potable water, and other items. The European Union is sending Ukraine $267 million in low-interest loans to revive its economy. We have another example tonight of just how porous and precarious national security can be. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge tells us how American secrets were apparently bought and sold right under the government's nose.
According to newly unsealed federal court documents obtained by Fox News, the Chinese government may not be satisfied by its legions of hackers to steal American secrets in cyberspace. This November 2014 FBI affidavit shows the Bureau investigated a State Department contractor for her admitted contact with individuals she believed were Chinese intelligence officers. It says the interpreter was paid, quote, thousands of dollars to provide information on U.S. persons and a U.S. government employee. From 1999, the State Department confirmed Xiaoming Gao, seen here translating on Capitol Hill, worked for the Office of Language Services over a 4-year period, beginning in June 2010.
She was employed as a contract interpreter until February of 2014, is not employed here anymore, and so for any additional questions on this, I'd refer you to the FBI.
The FBI is referring us back to State, however.
Well, I'm referring you back to them.
The FBI is saying nothing beyond the court documents that were filed so agents could search this storage unit in suburban Washington. The affidavit goes on to say the translator briefly lived rent-free with a State Department employee who held a top-secret clearance and designed high-security embassies, including this compound in Islamabad, Pakistan. Another U.S. citizen identified by Gao told the FBI he was interrogated by Chinese intelligence officers during a trip to Tibet, and a member of his family was thrown into prison. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington oversaw the case, recently declined to prosecute, and offered no further comment. A former Justice Department official says the decision is perplexing.
It's not clear to me, based on the court files that were unsealed, how a prosecution of this person could possibly have compromised U.S. intelligence gathering. If it jeopardizes or threatens to disrupt relations with another country, so be it. That you have to draw the line somewhere, and that we need to send a message that this sort of conduct and activity simply will not be tolerated.
What the documents don't fully explain is Gao's side of the story. Emails and phone calls to the consulting firm where she worked have gone unanswered, Brett.
Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
Up next, Hillary Clinton's go for the jugular strategy for dealing with new allegations of financial impropriety. First years with some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 25 in Boston with the start of the life or death phase of the Boston Marathon bombing trial. All 12 people on the jury must agree for Dzhokhar Tsarnaev to receive a death sentence. Otherwise, Tsarnaev will get life in prison. WDRB in Louisville with 9 people charged in a massive theft of Kentucky bourbon. Authorities say the heist by rogue distillery workers have been going on for at least 6 years. Investigators estimate the thieves resold the booze for more than $100,000. And this is a live look at Atlanta from Fox 5. They have some good news there tonight. First rescuers rescued a puppy trapped in a pipe today. The DeKalb County Heroes used heavy machinery to get the dog, making its 4-year-old owner very happy. It's good news. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.